A once-in-a-generation housing crash is now underway. The start of an epic generational shift in housing ownership in America, where the nearly 30 million baby boomers that currently own homes have started liquidating them and are going to continue to liquidate them. According to the US Census Bureau, seniors in America, households over the age of 65, own over 28 million homes right now. That's nearly 3 times the amount of homes that millennials and Gen Z own. What's disturbing is that each and every decade, this gap between older generation home ownership and younger generation home ownership has grown wider until today, because now we're seeing the start of a shift, of a transfer. Baby boomers in the silent generation, they're aging, they're moving into nursing homes. Many of them are unfortunately dying. Many of them can't afford their houses anymore due to higher property taxes and insurance payments, and the result is going to be an epic wave of inventory that's going to hit the housing market not just over the next year, but over the next 10 years, everyone, especially in a state like California, which is our number 5 generational housing crash state. There's over 2.3 million senior homeowners in California, the highest of any state in America. Over 1/3 of all the homes owned in California, and in certain counties, nearly 50%. And no doubt, the generational housing division that exists in California today is one of the reasons why home prices have become so expensive, where the typical value of a home in California in the middle of 2022, it's over 12 times higher than the average worker wages in the local economy. We can see that that's even more expensive than at the peak of the previous bubble in 2007, ultimately a situation that's not sustainable. And there's one thing you got to realize about California and the other states I'm going to show you on this list, is that they are all part of the demographic time bomb that's going off in America right now. And I got to tell you, everyone, 90% of people who work in real estate have their head in the sand on this trend. No one wants to acknowledge the grim reality that our growth levels are plummeting. Population growth rate in America in 2021 was the lowest level of all time, according to the US Census Bureau. Even more concerning, the population under the age of 18 went down by 1 million. It's a nightmare in terms of growth. However, the upshot is this is going to restore balance to the housing market. Inventory is going to structurally increase over the long run. Price growth will be going down, particularly in our number 4 state that's in the crosshairs of this demographic collapse, of this baby boomer fire sale. This state actually really surprised me. Over 40% of all the homes here are owned by seniors, and nearly 20% are owned by those over the age of 75. This is a state that, like California, has very expensive home prices, but I think in the near future, we're going to see much needed relief for home buyers in Hawaii, where 114,000 of the 280,000 owner-occupied homes are filled by seniors. And these seniors in Hawaii, they're starting to move into nursing homes. They're starting to die. We're seeing the death rates in the state of Hawaii go up a lot over the last 10 years. And the thing about this trend in Hawaii and the other states on this list is that it is inevitable. We cannot stop the aging of the US population. Life expectancy rates, they peaked about 10 years ago in America, around 79 years, and they've stayed the same since then. On top of that, we now have a record share of elderly people who are obese. Nearly 40% of seniors in America are classified as obese by the CDC. And so it's very likely that we've hit a glass ceiling on longevity, and that we're going to continue to see deaths increase into the future, even with a pandemic moving into the background. Especially in our number 3 state that's in the crosshairs of this collapse, South Carolina. 35% of all the homes in South Carolina are owned by seniors, according to the US Census Bureau. And if we look at a county level map, we can see that those figures push 50% in places like Horry County and Myrtle Beach, or Beaufort County and Hilton Head. If we zoom out here on the southeast, we can see quite a few areas in red in South Carolina on the Atlantic coast, but also going into North Carolina and Tennessee, we have a high share of baby boomer home ownership. Now, so far in the video, we've talked about deaths, why an increase in deaths is bad for the housing market, and I think most of you intuitively understand why that is. Fewer people living means fewer people demanding housing units, and that's going to lead to lower prices and rents. But there's yet another alarming trend that we need to be paying attention to, and that's the complete collapse in the number of babies being born in this country. Because as the millennial and Gen Z generations have fewer children into the future, that's going going to mean a structural decline in the demand for housing, because I think a lot of you know, especially if you've had kids, is that there is no greater incentive to buy a house than if you have a child on the way. All of a sudden, the space and the security afforded by the home, well, that outweighs everything else, even the price you have to pay or the mortgage rate. You just want a house to satisfy your need for space and security for the child. So if fewer and fewer people are having kids, that means fewer and fewer people are going to want to buy a home, especially when you look at this data, everyone. This data is shocking to me. Right now in America, there's about 33 million households, according to the US Census Bureau, that have a child in the household. What's alarming is that that's actually down 10% from its peak in 2007 when there was 37 million households with a child. And we can actually see that today's levels in the early 2020s are about what they were in 1994. So this data means that there's going to be fewer millennials and Gen Zs who actually want to buy a house due to life circumstances, but then in the long run, it's just going to mean less population into the future to occupy housing units. I mentioned that data earlier, how the under 18 population in the 2020 census went down from where it was in 2010. That is a bad sign for future housing demand. Ultimately, this is a demographic freight train hurtling towards the US housing market that's going to cause long-term secular stagnation, especially in our number 2 state on this list. It's going to have the biggest inventory surge and price reduction from baby boomers selling out of the market. In this state, nearly 37% of all of the homes are owned by seniors over the age of 65. Moreover, 16% of the owners in the state are over the age of 75. What state am I talking about? That would be Arizona, which has been a favorite for snowbirds and baby boomer transplants over the last 20 years, something that's caused home prices in Arizona to just skyrocket out of control. We can see the typical value of a home across the state is now 8.7 times the average local wages of the typical worker. Like California, that means Arizona's current housing market is even more expensive than it was in 2007 at the peak of the last bubble. You can all see what happened after that. There was a 50% crash in Arizona over 3 to 4 years. I think this crash starting in 2022 might take longer to shake out due to the demographic headwinds in Arizona being worse this time than they were 15 years ago. Now, before getting into the number 1 state on this list, we need to talk about a potential wild card here that could throw my analysis for a loop, and that is immigration. Because even if we have declining organic population growth and lots of people dying in America and fewer babies being born, we could potentially see an increase in immigration offset those losses and keep the housing market expensive and keep inventory low. Right now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the crisis that's going on the Mexico border. We have record numbers of customs interactions with migrants flowing over the border, which means we likely have a lot of illegal immigration in America right now. But here's the thing about illegal immigration, everyone. They are very unlikely to buy a house. In fact, they're more likely to end up in a homeless shelter in Washington, D.C., like what's occurring right now. The aspect of immigration you need to focus more on is legal immigration, the amount of people who are coming into this country on work visas and education visas. They are much more likely to be home buyers into the future or to rent expensive apartments. And interestingly, we can see over the last 30 years, the levels of legal immigration into America have plummeted, according to the US Census Bureau, which means fewer foreign buyers purchasing homes in the US over the last couple years. Data that's supported by the National Association of Realtors are showing a big drop-off in foreign home purchases in America, both from people who live in America on a work visa and people who don't live in America. So at least in the short term, we don't have a lot of immigrants buying homes in America, but that could change, right? All of a sudden, the Biden administration or the next presidential administration could say, let's increase the amount of legal immigrants. And if that were to happen, it's likely that the positive housing market impact would be felt in markets like New York, Miami, DC, Houston, LA, Boston, Dallas, San Francisco, Seattle. These are the places that have attracted the most immigration over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, metros like Port St. Lucie, Portland, Maine, Provo, Utah, Knoxville, Tennessee, Pensacola, Florida, Boise, Idaho, they attract very little international migration and would not necessarily see more home buyers or more people due to increased immigration levels. Now, are you guys ready? Our number 1 state that I'm saying you should avoid buying in right now due to the fact that inventory is going to go way up in the future and home prices are are going to go down due to baby boomers selling out of the market, due to a decline in demographic growth. This is a state that I think is going to cause a lot of controversy because I know a lot of my viewers live here. A lot of my viewers are looking to buy a house in this state and believe that the growth story is going to continue forever and that home prices are going to go up forever. Well, I do not think that's the case in Florida, our #1 state in the crosshairs of this generational housing collapse, because an astronomical 41% of homes across the state are owned by seniors. That's by far #1 in America, and in certain counties, everyone, that figure is like 57% in Collier County in Naples. It's 53% in Martin County in Port St. Lucie, 47% in West Palm Beach, 59% in Sarasota County. Basically, the entire state, with the exception of parts of Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville, is exposed to this aging population time bomb. Now, how about some honorable mentions before we sign off? What are some other states that have a very high share of senior and baby boomer homeowners where we could be seeing a long-term deluge of inventory and lower prices as they exit the housing market? One such cluster of states would be in the Northeast in America. We can see Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, heading down into the Midwest, and West Virginia and Ohio have a above average share of senior homeowners, around 33 to 35%. Looping on over the Pacific Northwest, we can see Oregon also has a surprisingly high share at 34%, as does Montana at 32%. Meanwhile, you can see the middle of America, the flyover states are in blue, meaning a lower share of senior homeowners in a state like Nebraska, which is only at a 26% senior homeowner rate. Texas is also low at 26%, with Utah being the lowest of them all at 25%. Now, I want to be clear about something, everyone. This doesn't mean that the states in blue like Utah won't have a housing crash. In fact, Utah is in the middle of a housing crash right now. Home sales just dropped to their lowest level in a decade in Utah. We're still going to see a lot of price declines in the states with younger homeowners, but these states are likely to perform better in the long run over the next 5, 10 to 15 years because they're not as exposed to the baby boomer exodus and fire sale from the US housing market. If you guys want to know the 10 cities that I think are going to have the biggest housing crash over the next 3 to 5 years, make sure to click the link in front of you right now. This is a video where I use fundamental data from the ReVenture Consulting home price model to predict where the biggest housing crashes are going to occur.